Dog Works Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/Teamaneke.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to our daily coverage of the 2020 Iditarod here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can hear all of our episodes over on DogWorksRadio.com. You can also check us out on social media by searching DogWorks Radio. And today is, I believe, our 9th day of coverage, and I am joined today by our co-host, Alex Stein, calling in from California. Alex, how's it going?
It's going great, Robert. You know, we have a bunch of teams are on the coast now. I believe there's 7 or 8 teams into Unilaclete, and 2 teams have gone past Unilaclete. Thomas Werner, when a bunch of teams were holed up at Old Woman Cabin, mushed through the storm overnight. And as longtime fans will know, that there are frequently things that happen and races can get upended when someone will mush through the storm. Libby Riddles did that when she won her first Iditarod. I know Rick Swenson did, I believe, on his 5th, and a bunch of other people have won the race by going forward through storms. This is not as late in the race as some of those things are, but it really has shaken things up on the front of the race.
And it's interesting about Thomas. He's only ran the race twice. He was Rookie of the Year, I believe, was it last year before? But he's also part of the Krill racing team, the professional racing team that has Dallas and Yor, and it's a big time outfit, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And one of the things that means is that they have access to the newest, most innovative, and most expensive equipment and training. And I don't know how much of that came into play when he decided to mush through the storm last night, but him going through, even though he did take a fairly long rest at Unilaclete, has put him pretty solidly in the lead by a couple of hours at least.
So it looks like, from what I'm seeing on the current race standings, we have him and then Brent Sass, Wade Mars, Aaron Burmeister, Jesse Royer, and Mitch Seavey are all kind of in that contention. What do you think about Brent? Do you think he can catch him?
I think really any one of those top 6, and I might add Ryan Reddington and Paige Drobny, who are close behind them. Any one of those top 8 at this point would be very, I won't say easily, but could very likely, conceivably, be able to win this race.
So we had 2 scratches since we were on the air last night. One of the scratches, Linwood Fielder, we have a story about coming up. And the other one is one of our recent musher profiles. Who is that?
Right. That is, sorry.
Martin Massacanet?
Mazzicati.
Mazzicati. There you go. And again, apologies for us messing up the names. We do it every year, and we get a little flack for it. But hopefully, both of those guys are okay. Do you have anything to report on them?
Yeah, Martin was down to only 9 dogs, which is not horrible, but certainly is not great. And I think he was just having trouble getting the right combination of dogs and didn't feel that he could go forward with it. Linwood, on the other hand, he had been having some trouble with his dogs for a while in the race, and just decided that it was the right thing to do to not make them continue for another 400 or 500 miles when they clearly were not having a good time.
So let's talk a little bit about Shaktoolik. That is a really interesting story that developed overnight, and it sort of has that coronavirus vibe to it in terms of our daily reporting on the illness, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it also fortunately has that old-time Alaska vibe, and that vibe of what I think really a lot of the spirit of the Iditarod race is, which is that after the race, at the request of the town of Shaktoolik, voted to move the checkpoint from inside the village to down by the river. And they actually decided they were just going to make it a resupply drop. So it's not going to be a manned checkpoint. So there's no checkers, there's no vets, there's no people signing in and out. It would just be a place where the drop bags were brought down there. Supplies of heat would be brought down there, and straw. And so, there was a lot of discussion about that and what that meant and whether it was a good thing or not. I think ultimately most people decided that it was a good thing, that it was too risky for, the residents of Shaktoolik and people the elders. We didn't want to risk any of them getting ill, but a lot of people were very sad about that. And as you mentioned last night, for a lot of these mushers, coming through and having this contact with people in the villages is one of the highlights of Iditarod. So something kind of great and amazing happened, which is that some of the leaders in Shaktoolik decided that they wanted to do something for Iditarod, and they wanted to do, they didn't want there not to be any protection from the elements. And frequently, people will stop in Shaktoolik before they go across the ice. And when it's windy, it can be really kind of brutal there. And there are some storms scheduled to come in. So they, in addition to moving all of the stuff down to the old village of Shaktoolik, which is about 2 miles away, they found that there was an abandoned building, I believe an abandoned house, that they decided that they would clean out and fix up so that the mushers could have a place where they could rest if they needed to and warm up. And apparently there were like 3 or 4 feet of snow inside this house, and they put stuff on the windows so that light could come in, but the wind couldn't come in. They cleared out all of the snow. They brought in a portable generator. They brought in an old stove. They chopped wood, and they chopped a hole in the ice so that mushers would have more easy access to water. And then they put up signs, on the way in telling people they were almost there, and really just kind of rolled out the welcome mat, with the caveat that they then are going to retreat 2 miles back to their village and won't actually be there when the mushers come in. And in addition to all of that, there was a great video about this that was on Facebook, and Blair Braverman, who's writing some stuff for the ADN during Iditarod, wrote an article about this. Some of the people in the village actually cooked, and then they brought food down so that there would even be food at the cabin for the mushers when they came in.
I saw the video of those guys cleaning out the house, and it looked like it was quite the chore. They were shoveling it out, and it looks like it's something that hadn't been used in quite a while. You had talked about Old Shaktoolik and New Shaktoolik. I believe that, I don't know if you mentioned it today, but we've mentioned it before. And a lot of those villages along that route there have that same sort of thing. And the reason that is a lot of those villages flooded, especially on the Yukon several years ago, and they had to move all of the village up a ways. And the reason that they did that is that FEMA came in and they said that we're not going to pay for you to rebuild, or you have to relocate up here to this newer version. So a lot of these places like Minto, Galena, Shaktoolik, a lot of these places have what they called old and new, and that's part of the reason, because they were sort of forced to move into an area, and they just decided to make their own new city. So an awesome story about Shaktoolik that, again, shows how a community comes together in an event like this, and it is really going to do well for all the mushers that come through there. Speaking of Shaktoolik and hitting the coast, in the village, or I guess it's the city of Unalakleet, there is a special tradition with pizza. What is that all about?
Yeah, so there is a restaurant in Unalakleet called Peace on Earth, and they are a pizza place. And what they do is, during Iditarod time, a tradition emerged, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 10 years ago, where fans would call up and order pizzas for their favorite musher as they saw that the musher was coming in or was close to coming in. And this restaurant will make the pizzas and will bring them out on snow machines and deliver them to the mushers. So it's this kind of treat, and it's this tradition that has grown up around the city. And someone, and I apologize, I forget who it was, pointed out to me on, I believe, either Twitter or Facebook, that sometimes they will deliver even farther. And there was one recent year when Karen Ramstead was running, and somebody ordered a pizza for her, and she did not stop for very long in Unalakleet, so they weren't able to get her the pizza. And what they did was they found a pilot who took it to her at either the next checkpoint or at White Mountain, just flew this pizza to her so that she could have her pizza.
What about the more popular mushers? We're thinking about Lance and Mitch and those type of names. Do you think that they get a dozen pizzas themselves, or do they put some type of limit on it?
That's a really good question. I would imagine that some of these people do get quite a few pizzas, but hopefully at the pizza place they are coordinating this with the people who called in. And also, I've been doing this Tales from the Trail series of short pieces of fiction, and there's a piece that is about a fictionalized version of this pizza delivery place that is up today. So people should check that out as well.
For sure. So let's move over to a couple of other stories. And the first one we're going to talk about, we had talked about Linwood Fielder just a minute ago about scratching overnight, but he had some interesting advice for a fellow competitor.
Right. So Jessica Klika, who we talked about last night or a couple nights ago, used to work for Linwood and apparently still refers to him as boss. And she was with him, I believe, in Nulato, and he was talking to her about this closing in Shaktoolik, and he had already made the decision that he was going to scratch, but he sat with her and he gave her very detailed advice about where on the trail, getting close to and just past Shaktoolik, were good places where she could get away from the elements in case the storms come in. And there was a piece about that, I believe, on Alaska Public Media, and they were talking about how cool it is that even though on the one hand these people are competitors, but on the other hand there is an awful lot of willingness to share information among Iditarod mushers.
Yeah, that's a cool story. And were they together before he scratched, or did he go down the trail and meet up with her? Because they weren't very close together in terms of checkpoints at that time, right?
Right. He had been, I believe, sitting in the checkpoint trying to decide whether or not to scratch, and she caught up with him, and then they met up there.
Okay, great. So the next story is something that happened before the race, but I read about this a couple of days ago, and I've been on the wrong side of a snow hook once or twice, but Kelly Maxiner really was on the wrong side, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was on a training run, and apparently the team went over a snow berm, and he was trying to set the snow hook to prevent it from to prevent the dogs from going and to prevent the sled from keeping going with the dogs. And the snow hook apparently did not catch, and it flew back, hit him in the skull, and tore off part of his ear. So apparently he had to go in. He has a titanium plate that was put in his skull, and he was saying that he still has some trouble closing his eye completely or smiling, which is why, incidentally, in a lot of the pictures you may have seen of him during this race, he looks a little bit like he is scowling. But he said that he is healing much faster and his face is moving more. He's been wearing goggles to protect his eyes, which is really good because if your eye doesn't close, there's a big danger that it could dry out and then you would be in a lot of trouble, or in these cold temperatures that it could freeze over and then you would be in a tremendous amount of trouble. So he is apparently running a team of Dallas CV dogs, and it is astonishing to me that after an accident like this, an injury like this, just a couple months later, he's off running the Iditarod.
They're tough guys and gals out there on the trail, and again, to compare and contrast other sports, I always say that hockey players are some of the toughest athletes compared to other sports. Because, in Major League Baseball, they sit down if they have, and I'll probably get in trouble for this, but they sit down if they have a hangnail, but not in an Iditarod or in hockey, do they?
No, I say this all the time, but whenever someone, isn't doing well or isn't doing relatively well or scratches, I always try to emphasize the fact that I am well aware that these people, even the least among them, the least skilled and the least capable among these Iditarod mushers, is so much more skilled, so much more capable, and so much tougher than I will dream of being.
For sure. So let's move over. Do you have anything else before we do our musher profile?
No, let's move over to that.
Okay, we're going to talk today about Quince Mountain. He is one of the fan favorites, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. But before we get too deep into this, we always talk every year about the competitiveness rule. And I was reading a story earlier today that he was about 300 miles behind the front runners. Is there any indication that he's not making himself down the trail quick enough?
Not so far, and anything along those lines as of yet is just speculative. And sometimes I get myself in trouble when I start speculating. So the only thing I will say about that is that in an ordinary year, we would probably be a little bit concerned, but not overly concerned. But, as we've discussed, this is not really an ordinary year. So if there is additional pressure on the people at the back, then that could be a factor. Hopefully it won't. And hopefully if there is some pressure that the people at the very back who are in danger will get some sort of indication. There have been times in the past where race judges or the race marshal will basically say to them, you need to speed up. You need to go a little bit faster or else you're in danger. I don't have any indication that has happened or that it will happen, and hopefully it won't.
From a musher's perspective, when you say they need to speed up, that typically does not mean speed up your team down the trail, meaning you're making your dogs go faster. That almost always means speed up your rest. So if you're planning on taking an 8-hour rest in a checkpoint, they may ask you to cut that back or to cut back on your chores or that sort of thing. So almost always that speed up means speed up your time in the checkpoints or on your rest. Is that right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump over to talk about Quince.
So Quince Mountain is a rookie this year. He is a rider, a horse rider. He grew up around horses, and now he is a dog musher. He and Blair Braverman, his former girlfriend and now wife, are both dedicated to telling stories, and they do a lot of stuff on Twitter and on Facebook and on their various other social media sites, where they spend a lot of time getting up close and personal with their various dogs. And people who are fans of theirs are usually very, very well versed with their individual dogs and will tell stories about their dogs and know the dog's characteristics. And this is all because Quince and Blair make a very strong point of communicating this sort of thing. So Quince is a veteran. He served in the National Guard for 8 years as a medic. He met Blair in 2011 when they were both in a writing program at the University of Iowa, and together they run Braver Mountain Mushing in Wisconsin. And they live in the North Woods of Wisconsin, and they are very strongly devoted to the idea of community and bringing people in and being supportive of members of their community. Fun fact about Quince: he is allergic to dogs, but he decided that he wanted to find out about dog mushing after he and Blair started dating. He said in his Iditarod bio that being on the runners and being out in the woods behind a dog team felt like a magical return to some kind of bucolic, laugh-filled childhood I never actually had. So a few years ago, Quince was one of our Twitter buddies when I first started doing this show with you, and he and Tony Ryder and me and Karen would stay up all through the night talking about Iditarod and talking about various teams and what was going on. And then he decided that he wanted to learn how to run dogs. So he actually contacted Tony and said, well, what do I do? Who should I approach? He was able to start working with Mitch Seavey's Iditarod tours, also worked as a volunteer for Iditarod on what they now call the Returned Dog Crew, which used to be called the Drop Dog Crew. Last year, when it was Blair's rookie year, he followed along on a snow machine and did some reporting for the Iditarod podcast, and completed his qualifiers, and he put up a GoFundMe when he had the chance to run Iditarod. And his fans, who are known far and wide on Twitter and elsewhere as the Ugly Dogs, funded his GoFundMe, contributing over $57,000 in under 2 days. So he was able to run a team. He's actually not running his dogs and Blair's dogs, the team that Blair ran last year, but he's running a team from Barb and Ramey Rennington. And he said that running these Reddington dogs was like being able to drive a Ferrari and being able to like really have these very, very powerful dogs. Another fun fact about Quince is that he has face blindness, which means that he is not able to recognize faces. And so sometimes when he sees someone, even if it's someone that he knows very well, he will not be able to recognize faces. And that's a neurological condition that is rare but well known. He appeared last year on Discovery Channel's Naked and Afraid reality TV show, where people are put out in the wilderness, literally naked with, I think, one weapon, like one knife or something, and then they have to survive, I believe, for 21 days. Another fun fact about him is that one of his sponsors is a meteorologist. And at the banquet in Anchorage, he said that he recommends that every musher should get their own personal meteorologist. And he is really just a very kind and compassionate and very caring person who, like, almost everyone who's met him talks about how he likes to bring people in and really connect with them. The other thing, and I was almost not going to mention this at all, is that Quince is the first openly transgender musher to run in the Iditarod. And I think up until he was on Naked and Afraid, there probably were a lot of people in the mushing community who weren't aware of the fact that he is transgender, although he doesn't keep it a secret. I've heard for years that there may have been someone who was trans who ran Iditarod in the 80s and 90s, but I'm not sure who that was, and they were not open about it. So, Quince said that, and I realize that I'm coming from a position of privilege, being, a cisgendered, white, straight male, that this, I can say things like the fact that Quince is trans is one of the least interesting things about him, because he is an amazing and very, very interesting person. But I also realize that, and Quince has talked about this recently as well, that it is very important for people who are trans and for people who are members of the LGBTQ community to have someone that they can look up to have someone who is doing things that they can say, oh, I can do some of these cool things because Quince Mountain is doing some of these cool things. And it's fascinating to me that there are a lot of people in the mushing community who are a little bit conservative, a lot of very, very strong libertarian people who might, in some cases, not have a lot of patience for people who are trans, or for people advocating for trans rights. But as far as I know, I have not heard any of those people in the mushing community say anything about Quince. And I think the reason is that, although this is obviously a very important part of who he is and of his life story, he has earned his way into the Iditarod. He's not in the Iditarod just because it's a tokenism thing. He's there because he's completed all of his qualifiers. He's there because he's done everything that every other rookie would have to do. And so it's just really amazing to see him running the Iditarod Trail. I should also say, in terms of full disclosure, that I put together a little project for Quince, which was something he didn't know about, but just something I thought would be cool, where I got a bunch of his Ugly Dogs fans to contribute audio greetings for him, sort of like an audio mushergram. And I got our friends Daniel and Christy Lent to pick up a small MP3 player that I bought online that they picked up at a store in Anchorage, and they burned this file onto the MP3 player and gave it to Quince so that he could take it with him on the trail and listen to it, when he was somewhere in Iditarod and maybe needed a boost or was on his 24 or something like that. And actually, I just put that up online a few days ago, so anyone who's interested can listen to that as well. So, and he is currently in the Red Lantern position, and he just a little bit before we got on the air, is now up in Ruby on the Yukon River.
I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Alex. I thought you were done there. So folks, we are definitely going to go over time for a few minutes, and hopefully our kind radio host, Mike from KVRF, won't get too upset with us. But I have a couple of things to add about Quince Mountain. One of them is more of a point to make or a question to you. And you had mentioned that back in the early days, and I remember these days several years ago when you and I and all of the other folks that you mentioned were talking, and Quince would be on there all hours of the night asking questions and providing commentary. So my question to you, Alex, do you think you had a little bit of a reason why he's now a dog musher?
Yeah, it's clear that he really wanted to learn all about this and wanted to learn how to do this. He said at the banquet that really the reason that he's in mushing right now is because of Blair, and he warned people to be careful of who they fall in love with, because their passions and their interests are likely to become yours as well.
Right, for sure. And yeah, he is very active on Twitter year round. And for folks outside of the Ugly Dogs community, he's very approachable, and he will definitely reach out and talk to you about whatever topic it is, for sure. So the next thing that I want to mention, this is something we mentioned, I believe, on our second day of coverage this year when they were doing the restart, and we talked about sort of the new way of fans following mushing, and we talked a little bit about that time, the Ugly Dogs, and how they've really changed how folks follow mushing, in particular on Twitter and on Facebook. And this is in big part, of course, because of Blair and Quince. But what can you tell our new listeners just how much of a force these guys are? I have no idea how many there are. Can you give us kind of a hint on that and just talk a little bit about the Ugly Dogs community, and not what they do necessarily about Iditarod, because we've talked about that, but just their force on social media and how much of an impact that they make, at least on the fan side?
It's huge. I mean, I had 40 Ugly Dogs who contributed to this Mushergram thing that I put together, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. If I had to guess, I would say there probably are maybe between 500 and 1,000 who are really active, and then there's probably another 5,000 who are less active but still interested. So it's a big fan base.
And how do you think that they became so attracted to the sport? Of course, Blair was already a very well-accomplished writer, not only as an author of her book, but also a writer through Outside Magazine and Outside Online. But that's not a huge publication in terms of wide reach. That has a very niche market in terms of outdoor folks. And how do you think all of these people came together? Because I don't think a heck of a lot of them are hardcore outdoor enthusiasts.
Yeah, maybe not. Honestly, I think it's through their use of Blair and Quince's use of storytelling, and their use of really getting people to know their dogs in depth and to feel invested in their dogs. And so that's the first part of it, and probably the most important part. And the other part is they're very, very inviting and caring people. And a lot of their fans are LGBTQ because of Quince being trans, but also they appeal to people who aren't necessarily always outdoors people or mushing fans, and sort of say, well, yes, you're different, and you might have these things that you're interested in that other people in the mushing community aren't interested in, but you are valuable and you are important. And I think that their message of being inclusive and trying to emphasize the goodness in people and the possibilities that people can have if they are compassionate, is really really attractive. And especially now, especially these days, not to get too political, but especially these days, it seems like that is something we all really need, and it's kind of in short supply a lot of the time.
Last point on this, Alex, and again, this is sort of kind of moved over to the ugly dogs versus the kind of the Quince profile. On the coverage the other day, you had mentioned that if we talked about Mark Nordman and the CEO and all of those guys saying that they're fighting for relevance in terms of the Iditarod on a bigger picture, and you said that the new CEO ought to sit down with some of these folks from the ugly dogs community. So my question to you, and this is my last question of the night, is how can they help? How do you see it moving forward in the next 5 or 10 years? Because I think both of these guys, Blair and Quince, this is not just their first time around. I think that they're going to be back, maybe not every year, but I think that they're going to be back a few more times. How do you think this type of community can push the sport forward?
I think that there are a lot of other mushers who could be taking a cue from them and could be engaging more with fans, and not just with the hardcore fans, with the fans who've been, following the sport for 10 or 20 years. But I think that there's a real opportunity to bring in new people, and people who maybe weren't necessarily attracted to sled dogs before. And to be fair, there are some mushers who do this a little bit. I know that Ali Zirkle certainly does that, I think, fairly well, but everyone could be posting more stuff about their dogs, and could really be just engaging and getting people invested in their dogs, in their kennel, and that makes people much more engaged with the race. And that's not an easy thing to do. And I don't think it's an accident that Quince and Blair are able to do this so well, because they are both really good writers. So they are people who are familiar with how you structure and put together and tell a story. And while a lot of mushers are very good storytellers, to be able to do that and put it out in public where it can, sort of live and be there for a while, and other people can look at and potentially, criticize or react to, is something that a lot of people in general, and mushers definitely, are not really that comfortable with. So, I think that the first thing is just engage, use storytelling, and be open to people who weren't necessarily already sled dog fans.
And speaking of sled dog fans and being all about the dogs, I had a guest on, a mushing friend of ours, Jake Way, right before Iditarod. They were talking about a new race up in Minnesota, and he had with him one of Blair's dogs at that race, and I believe the Bear Grease, if I'm not mistaken. And all of the fans would come up and say, "Hey," and I don't remember the dog's name. It's one of their most popular dogs. You probably would know more than I. "Hey, is that so-and-so? I want a picture of so-and-so." And people were just bending over backwards to meet the sled dog. And I think that's what this sport really needs. It does need to be more about the dogs, and, less about politics and all of that, because that's, I think, what's going to help move it forward. And a lot of these feel-good stories that we do on our show, at least we hope can contribute as well.
Right. And, it would take a little bit to implement this, but I know that the Iditarod does keep track of every single dog. So they have a master list in some form of every single dog on every single team who is running the Iditarod. And when a dog gets dropped or returned, and gets sent back to Anchorage or sent forward to Nome, they have a record of that. And I've noticed a lot of times people will say, well, so-and-so dropped a dog. Do we know which dog it is? And unless the way it is now, unless the musher or the musher's kennel or family or handlers actually post which dog it is, it's very hard to get that information. And if there was a way to, because I know the Iditarod has that information, if there was a way to make that information available to people, I think that could spur a lot of interest as well, because then people would be, would get to know and get to really feel invested in the individual dogs as well as in the mushers.
One other thing, you just keep pushing me along, Alex, is something that
Mike is going to kill us.
I know that Jeff Schultz is doing, the Faces of Iditarod, and he's doing not only people along the trail, but the dogs along the trail as well. I think that is an awesome thing that's going on right now. Such beautiful pictures that he's doing. And he's also doing something at the Museum of the Dog in New York City. So we're giving all kinds of great information tonight. What do you think about that project that Jeff Schultz is doing?
Oh, it's amazing. And not only Jeff Schultz has been the official photographer of the Iditarod, I believe, since it began, which kind of happened because he was there and was interested and just started taking pictures. And after a few years, the ITC said, yeah, we'll make you official photographer. And he was before that just basically doing it by himself and giving them the pictures. So Jeff is a fantastic photographer. He just recently started a Patreon, so if people wanted to do something, they could support him. Throw him a couple bucks a month or whatever. And not only is he a great photographer, but he also has a lot of really fantastic Iditarod stories. And with this Faces of Iditarod, for I believe all of them, or at least most of them, if you go on the Iditarod.com site and go over to the Faces of Iditarod, you can not only see these portraits and these pictures that he's taken, but most of them have short audio interviews with the subjects of the pictures, and those are just wonderful.
They are, and that is how Iditarod is changing. All of those things that we mentioned tonight, not only with Jeff and Quince and Blair and Ugly Dogs and Igivarod and the whole 9 yards and the Q-Paw racing, all of that. That is the new Iditarod, and I know they talked about changing of the guard in terms of mushers. I really think that this is sort of changing of the guard to take the sport to the next level, and I think that's what we need for sure. Alex, so we are definitely over time. Anything else in closing before we go?
Just that even though we are on the coast and it's looking like there are, one or two or possibly 6 or 8 mushers who are doing really, really well, there is some weather heading in, and there's still almost 300 miles to go before this race is over.
Right. And all the years that we've been doing this, we have only been on the air one time when the winter finished. It typically happens sometime very late or on Tuesday or very early on Wednesday. So I think we're on track for that again this year, even though we said it was going to be a slower race. I think we're going to see about the same finishing time that we normally do.
Yeah, Danny Seavey had predicted that he thinks it's going to happen around 3 a.m. on Wednesday, or 2 a.m. on Wednesday, which is a very, very specific prediction. But Danny Seavey usually has a pretty good grasp on the data, so I would be looking for something early Wednesday.
Well, he is the man for sure. Alex, it's a pleasure as always. We will talk again tomorrow, 7 o'clock Alaska time, 8 o'clock or so Alaska time, about midnight on the East Coast. Make sure you check us out on social media by searching Dogworks Radio, and be sure to hit that subscribe button no matter where you're listening, and you'll get these episodes as soon as they drop. Alex, we'll talk again soon, okay?
All right. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. On behalf of my co-host, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto for Mushing Radio. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for DogWorks Radio. Did you know that Alaska DogWorks trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska DogWorks on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.